in the early morning light. As the sun begins to climb over the vast, golden plains of Tsavo National Park in Kenya, the landscape awakens with a quiet yet profound energy. The sky is painted with hues of orange and pink, and a cool breeze stirs the tall grasses that stretch as far as the eye can see. It is in this serene and untamed environment that one of Africa's most legendary creatures stirs from its rest, Rafiki. The old lion, once a mighty ruler, the aging Rafiki now walks the earth as a shadow of his former self. But his presence is no less commanding. Rafiki was once a lion at the peak of his power, a magnificent and formidable leader of a large pride. His territory stretched across the vast savanna, and he ruled over it with an iron paw. The other animals of the region respected him, and his name was spoken in hushed tones among both predators and prey. His strength, his regal posture, and his commanding presence were the stuff of legends. In his prime, Rafiki's mane was a glorious mass of thick, golden fur that shone like the sun itself, a symbol of his dominance and majesty. His eyes, sharp and calculating, had the ability to see through the heart of the savanna, sensing even the slightest shift in the landscape or the movement of a potential threat. He was the protector, the guardian of his realm, and nothing could challenge his rule. But that was many seasons ago. Now, in his old age, Rafiki's once mighty mane has become thin and sparse, a mere shadow of its former glory. The golden strands that once cascaded like a regal cloak now hang limp and tangled, worn by the passage of time. His powerful frame has lost some of its strength. The muscles that once rippled beneath his coat now less pronounced. Though still formidable, each step he takes is slower, each movement more deliberate. The world around him has changed, and so too has he. Despite these changes, Rafiki's presence is still felt throughout the park. The other lions, though younger and stronger, continue to show him deference. He is a symbol of history, a living relic of a time when he was invincible. The younger lions, having grown up hearing tales of his greatness, watch him with a mix of respect and curiosity. Some wonder if Rafiki still possesses the strength he once had, while others, perhaps, are quietly waiting for the day when they must step up to take his place as the new leader of the pride. As Rafiki moves through the grasses, his steps are measured and cautious. His eyes scan the horizon, ever vigilant, ever watchful, his mind still sharp, though his body now betrays him. Rafiki knows that his time is drawing to a close, but he also knows that his legacy will endure long after he has gone. His pride, which he once protected with unyielding force, will continue to live on. The land that he once ruled will remain, and the stories of his reign will be passed down through generations of lions. Etched into the very fabric of the savanna itself, the morning sun now casts a soft, golden light on Rafiki's weathered form. The light catches the edges of his once proud mane, illuminating the few strands that remain. He stands tall, though his body may be weary, and he gazes out across his domain, the land that he has fought for, bled for, and ultimately, will leave behind. In the distance, the sounds of the savanna fill the air, the calls of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the distant roar of another lion claiming its territory. But Rafiki remains still, as if listening to the whispers of the past. His thoughts, though hard to decipher, likely drift to the many battles he fought in his prime. The moments of glory when he was the undisputed king of the Tsavo Plains. He may remember the day he first ascended to leadership, the battles he won to secure his position, and the years spent defending his pride and territory from rivals. He was a lion of immense strength, courage, and wisdom. Rafiki's leadership was not just based on raw power, but also on his keen understanding of the ways of the savannah. He knew when to fight and when to retreat, when to assert his dominance and when to allow peace to reign. His strategies were cunning, and his ability to read the land and the animals around him made him nearly untouchable. As the years passed, Rafiki's pride grew. He fathered many cubs, and his legacy continued through them. His roar, once a mighty declaration that echoed across the savannah, became less frequent, though it still held a note of authority when he did choose to use it. Other lions, eager for power, tested him, but few dared to challenge his rule. Rafiki's reign was long and unyielding, and even as he aged, the respect he commanded never diminished completely. However, age is inevitable, and even the mighty Rafiki could not escape it. His strength began to fade, his once imposing body slowly deteriorating. His mane, once full and thick, became thin and patchy, a sign of his declining health. The cubs he sired grew into strong, capable lions themselves, and some began to look toward the future, eager to take up the mantle that Rafiki once held so effortlessly. It was not a matter of disrespect, but rather the natural course of life in the wild. The young lions were hungry for power, and Rafiki, while still revered, knew that his time was coming to an end. Despite his age, Rafiki is not entirely powerless. He still holds a quiet dominance over the pride, and his knowledge of the land and its rhythms is unparalleled. He is the embodiment of wisdom, the living connection to a past that many of the younger lions can only dream of. His role has shifted from that of an active leader to a figure of guidance and history. His legacy will be remembered in the stories the younger lions tell, in the way they conduct themselves, and in the pride they continue to protect. As Rafiki surveys the land one last time, his heart swells with pride. His journey, though nearing its end, has been one of incredible significance. The mighty lion who once commanded the savannah is now a symbol of its enduring spirit. His name will live on in the winds that rustle through the tall grasses, in the roar of the lions who come after him, and in the hearts of those who still remember the great Rafiki, the lion who ruled with strength, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to his pride. As the years passed, Rafiki's once great strength began to fade. His mighty body, once a symbol of power and resilience, was now a shadow of its former self. His coat, which had once been thick and lush, had become thin and matted, a reflection of the toll time had taken on him. The roar that had once reverberated across the savannah with authority and command now came out as a weak, hoarse rasp, barely carrying beyond the grasses around him. The lions that once looked to him as their king, their protector, now saw a tired and frail figure, a far cry from the majestic ruler who had once been the heart of the pride. The younger lions, led by Kazi, began to grow restless. Kazi, a powerful and ambitious lion, had been waiting for his moment to take control. He had always admired Rafiki's leadership, but over time, he had become more and more convinced that it was his turn to lead. He, along with other younger members of the pride, began to challenge Rafiki's authority. They could no longer deny the fact that the mighty lion was no longer the leader he had once been. Rafiki's battle-worn body and diminished strength made him vulnerable. He could no longer defend his position as fiercely as he once had. and the younger lions began to question whether it was time for a change. The restlessness of the pride grew, and soon the tension was palpable. Whispers spread among the lions, and there was a sense that Rafiki's reign was nearing its end. Kazi, ever the ambitious one, began to assert himself more boldly. His strength was undeniable, and his presence began to dominate. His eyes were filled with a hunger for power, and the pride could sense that he was ready to take his place as the new leader. It was not long before the inevitable happened. One fateful day, the pride erupted into conflict. The sun was high in the sky, beating down on the savannah as Rafiki, weak from age and weariness, watched the younger lions gather around him. Kazi stepped forward, his eyes cold and determined. He no longer saw Rafiki as a wise elder, but as an obstacle to his own ambitions. The air was thick with tension, and the once proud leader of the pride could feel his heart race in his chest. It was a battle he had known would come, but the weight of age hung heavily on him. Rafiki knew that his time had passed, but the instinct to protect his pride, to defend the legacy he had built, still burned fiercely within him. Without warning, Kazi lunged at Rafiki, his powerful limbs propelling him forward with a speed that the older lion could no longer match. Rafiki, though slow, retaliated with all the strength he could muster. The ground shook with the intensity of the clash, and the roar of the two lions filled the air, a sound that once commanded respect and awe. But now, Rafiki's roar was weak, strained, fading. The young lions joined in, circling Rafiki, attacking from all sides. The battle was brutal. Rafiki fought with all the dignity he could summon, his claws raking through the air, his teeth bared in a last, desperate attempt to defend himself. He was outmatched, his muscles not what they once were. Every strike he delivered felt slower, more labored, and the younger lions, with their vigor and speed, wore him down with relentless attacks. The once mighty lion was no match for the coordinated assault. Rafiki's body was battered, blood staining his golden fur as the younger lions tore into him with cruel precision. Kazi's jaws closed around Rafiki's neck, and though he did not deliver a fatal blow, the message was clear. Rafiki's time was over. The older lion's energy began to wane, his limbs growing heavy, his breathing shallow. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. And he knew deep in his bones that he could no longer fight to protect his place. He had given everything he had, and now, his body betrayed him. With a final, painful roar, Rafiki staggered back. His body trembled with exhaustion, and he realized, with great sorrow, that the battle was lost. His strength had failed him, and the pride, once his to command, was slipping away. The young lions, now victorious, stood over him, their eyes filled with a mixture of triumph and cold indifference. There was no sense of reverence for the great lion that had once led them. Only a hunger for the power they had just claimed. Rafiki's reign had ended not with the roar of glory, but with the silence of defeat. Unable to continue the fight, Rafiki turned and stumbled away from the pride. His heart was heavy with sorrow, knowing that the family he had protected for so long was no longer his. His body ached with every step, and as he walked, the weight of his years grew heavier. The land that had once been his home now seemed foreign, a place where he no longer belonged. For the first time in his life, Rafiki felt the sting of loneliness, the emptiness of a lion who had lost everything. With great effort, Rafiki wandered into uncharted territory, an area of Tsavo that he had never explored. The tall grasses whispered around him, and the quiet of the unfamiliar land pressed in on him like a suffocating shroud. The sounds of the savannah seemed distant, as if mocking him with their sense of continuity, while Rafiki moved in a daze, aimlessly searching for a place to rest. He had no pride to return to, no place to call home. The once proud leader, the symbol of strength and power, was now a solitary wanderer, abandoned by time and the very pride he had built. The days passed, and Rafiki's strength continued to diminish. He no longer had the energy to fight, no longer had the will to protect. His body, once so mighty, now felt like an old, weathered shell, worn down by the cruelty of time. He had given everything for the pride, but in the end, it was no longer his to lead. All that remained was the quiet of the wilderness and the haunting memory of a lion who had once ruled with unchallenged might. Rafiki's final days were spent in solitude, his mind reflecting on the glory of his past and the inevitable passage of time. The land, vast and untamed, would continue without him. The pride would go on, led by new lions like Kazi, whose hunger for power had finally been sated. But Rafiki, the once great lion, was a thing of the past, a fading legend in a world that had moved on without him. Rafiki's journey was one of pain and perseverance. His once powerful frame, which had dominated the savannah for so many years, now seemed fragile, a mere shadow of its former glory. His muscles, once rippling with strength, now ached with every step. The battle with the young lions had left him bruised and wounded. His golden fur now streaked with blood and dirt. His body felt heavier with each passing moment, the weight of age, loss, and injury pushing him further into a state of exhaustion. The heat of the sun bore down on him, and his throat was parched, his stomach empty. Yet, through it all, Rafiki pushed forward. His instinct for survival, the deep, primal urge to keep going, drove him onward. Every step was a struggle. The open plains stretched out before him, seemingly endless, and yet, every inch of the earth beneath his paws felt like a great distance. The savannah that had once been his kingdom now seemed foreign to him. The sounds of the animals, the rustling of the grass in the wind, all seemed distant, muted, as if they too were mourning the loss of their great leader. Despite the growing weakness in his body, Rafiki kept moving, his eyes scanning the horizon for something, anything, that could provide him with a sense of purpose or relief. After what felt like an eternity, Rafiki finally reached the boundary of Tsavo National Park. The familiar stretch of grasslands that had once felt like home gave way to something new, a village. The tall grasses gradually transformed into smaller shrubs and cleared areas, and the distant hum of human activity began to reach his ears. Rafiki had never ventured this far before. The village lay at the very edge of the park, where the wilds met human civilization. It was a place he had never been, a place he had never needed to understand. But now, in his weakened state, it was all he had left. Rafiki approached cautiously, every step slower than the last. His limbs felt stiff, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The air was thick with unfamiliar smells, wood smoke, food, and the faint scent of humans. He hesitated, unsure of what to expect. But his body could go no further. He collapsed onto the ground near the edge of the village, his body too tired to move any longer. As Rafiki lay there, his mind was foggy, but he was still aware of his surroundings. The village was quiet, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the distant chatter of people. His sharp eyes remained alert, even as his body betrayed him. He had never encountered humans before, and now he found himself at the very edge of their world, with nowhere else to go. It wasn't long before someone noticed him. A woman, older than the others in the village, walked out from one of the small houses at the edge of the settlement. Her name was Amina. She had lived in the village for many years. Though her life had been far from typical, Amina had spent most of her life working within Tsavo National Park, caring for the animals and the land. Her love for nature and its creatures had driven her to devote herself to the preservation of wildlife. And after many years of service, she had retired to live in a quiet, modest home on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by the animals she had once cared for. It was a life she had chosen for peace, for solitude, and for a chance to continue to live close to the creatures she held dear. Amina had seen many animals come and go over the years, but none had ever been like Rafiki. When she spotted the old lion lying near the village, she was immediately drawn to him. She knew who he was. She had heard the stories, the legends of the great lion who had once ruled the savannah, the protector of Tsavo, the mighty Rafiki. But now, seeing him in such a state, so broken and vulnerable, her heart swelled with compassion. She approached cautiously, her steps measured, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and awe. Despite his condition, Rafiki was still a majestic creature, his regal posture still evident, even in his weakened state. Amina knelt down beside him, keeping a respectful distance, but speaking softly, her voice calm and soothing. "It's okay, old friend," she said gently, her words carrying the weight of a lifetime of experience. "You've been through so much." Rafiki's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition. It was as if he understood that this woman, though human, meant him no harm. She was a protector of the land, just as he had once been. Perhaps she, too, understood the pain of aging, the loneliness of loss. Amina had spent much of her life working with animals, observing their behaviors and understanding their needs. She knew how to care for them, how to offer comfort and safety. She also knew that Rafiki's wounds, both physical and emotional, would not heal easily. The battle had taken its toll. And now, the great lion was a shadow of the powerful creature he had once been. But Amina was not afraid. She had a deep respect for the natural world, and she saw in Rafiki not just a dying king, but a being deserving of dignity in his final days. She gently placed a hand on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. His body was warm, but it was clear that he was in great pain. She could feel the roughness of his fur, the raggedness of his breath, and she knew that time was running out for him. But she was determined to help him, to offer him the peace he deserved in his final moments. For the next several days, Amina tended to Rafiki. She brought him food and water, offering what she could to sustain him. She spoke to him softly, telling him stories of the park and the animals he had once protected. She made sure he was comfortable, keeping him sheltered from the elements and checking his wounds. Rafiki did not resist. In the presence of Amina, he seemed to find a kind of peace, as though he had finally found someone who understood the weight of his journey. Though Rafiki could no longer roam the plains of Tsavo, he found solace in the quiet, tender care that Amina offered. It was a far cry from the glory he had once known. But it was a comfort all the same. Amina had spent her life caring for the creatures of the park. And now she cared for him in his final days. Rafiki, the once great lion who had ruled with such strength and wisdom, found a new kind of respect, not as a ruler, but as a patient and beloved creature, deserving of love and dignity in his last moments. In the stillness of those days, as Rafiki lay by Amina's side, the savannah carried on without him. But for the first time in many years, he was at peace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Amina sat quietly in her modest home. The peaceful sounds of the village at dusk surrounded her, children laughing, dogs barking in the distance, and the gentle rustling of the trees in the cool evening breeze. She had lived in this small house on the outskirts of the village for many years now, finding solace in the company of nature and the animals she loved. Yet, tonight, the silence was broken by an unexpected sound. A faint, hoarse roar echoed from the darkness outside. Amina's heart skipped a beat. It was a sound she had heard many times before. But this one was different. It was weak, almost pitiful, a shadow of the mighty roars that had once commanded the savannah. Her mind immediately raced as she recognized the sound. Rafiki, the great lion of Savo, the one who had once ruled the plains. She had not expected to hear him again, let alone in such a state. Amina hesitated for only a moment, though the roar had caused a flutter of fear in her chest. It was swiftly replaced by the deep well of compassion that had guided her throughout her life. She had seen so much of the savannah's cruelty, the dangers animals faced, and the price of survival in the wild. She knew the importance of kindness, and above all, the importance of offering help when it was needed most. She couldn't let Rafiki, a creature she had respected for so long, suffer alone in the darkness. Without wasting a second, she opened the door to her home. The cool night air rushed in, and she stepped outside, her eyes scanning the dim surroundings. There, just beyond the small patch of light spilling from the doorway, she saw him. Rafiki's massive form was barely visible in the shadows. He was crouched low to the ground, his body covered in dirt and blood. His mane, once a glorious crown of gold, was now matted and tattered, and his fur was caked with the grime of the savannah. His movements were slow, labored, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The wounds on his body were obvious, scratches, gashes, and cuts that had been poorly tended to, some still fresh, others beginning to scab over. His once majestic eyes, which had once sparkled with fire and strength, now looked tired and dim. It was a heartbreaking sight, one that shook Amina to her core. For a brief moment, fear crept into Amina's heart. After all, Rafiki was a lion, one of the fiercest predators in the wild. But the fear quickly dissipated, replaced by the unwavering compassion that had always defined her. She had dedicated her life to caring for the creatures of the park. And now, it was her turn to return the kindness. Taking a deep breath, Amina stepped forward slowly, speaking in a low, calming voice. "It's all right, Rafiki. I'm here to help," she whispered, hoping the familiar sound of her voice would bring him some comfort. The old lion, though clearly weakened, turned his head toward her. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passing through them. The great lion seemed to understand that she meant no harm, that she was offering help. not harm. He let out a soft, exhausted sigh, his massive frame sagging as he finally allowed himself to relax in her presence. Amina knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the medical supplies she had kept from her years of work in the park. She had learned how to treat wounds and care for animals in need. But even with all her experience, this situation felt different. This was Rafiki, the lion who had once been the king of the savannah. Now, he was no different from any other injured animal in need of care. Time was of the essence. Amina knew she had to act quickly. She carefully pulled out a small, worn first aid kit, a tool she had used many times in the past to tend to animals in the park. She had no idea how much time Rafiki had left, but she knew that every second mattered. Gently, she began to clean the blood and dirt from his wounds, her fingers working as tenderly as possible to avoid causing him any more pain. Rafiki let out a low, groaning sigh, but he did not fight her. He was too weak to resist. And in that moment, it seemed as though he trusted her. As Amina worked, she spoke softly to him, offering words of comfort, even though she knew he could not respond. "You've given so much to this land, Rafiki," she murmured. "Now, let me give something back to you." Her voice was steady, soothing, as she wrapped his wounds with bandages and made sure to apply the ointments she had brought. She worked in silence, knowing that the old lion needed all the peace he could get in that moment. When she had finished tending to his injuries, Amina sat back and sighed, her heart heavy with both sadness and relief. Rafiki's breathing had slowed, and though he was still weak, he seemed a little more comfortable. She wasn't sure how long he would last, but she knew she had done all she could for now. Amina stood up and took a step back, her gaze falling upon the lion who had once ruled the vast plains of Savo. The scene was humbling. The mighty king of the savannah, reduced to a fragile, wounded creature in need of help. Amina's heart ached for him, for the suffering he had endured, for the loss of the strength that had once defined him. But at the same time, she felt a deep sense of gratitude that she could offer him the care he so desperately needed. Knowing that she couldn't do it all alone, Amina immediately contacted the park's conservation team. She knew they had the resources and knowledge to provide more specialized care for Rafiki, and she hoped that they would be able to help him recover, or at least offer him a dignified end. She explained the situation to them, providing all the details she could, hoping they would respond quickly. As Amina waited for the team to arrive, she stayed close to Rafiki, offering him the comfort of her presence. She kept speaking softly to him, continuing to offer her gentle assurances. She could not take away the pain he had suffered, but she could give him something precious: kindness, care, and respect. The minutes stretched into hours, but Amina never left his side. It was a small gesture in the grand scheme of things, but for Rafiki, it was the act of compassion that he so needed in his final days. Through her actions, Amina demonstrated a deep love for the animals that had been her life's work, showing that even in their weakest moments, every creature deserved to be treated with care and dignity. As the night fell, Amina continued to sit beside Rafiki, the quiet guardian of a lion who had once been a king. Not long after Amina had carefully tended to Rafiki's wounds, the conservation team arrived with all the necessary equipment to safely move him. They approached with caution, aware of the lion's weakened state, but also with the expertise that came from years of caring for wild animals. The team had brought tranquilizers and other medical supplies to ensure Rafiki would be safely transported to a secure area in the park for further treatment. Amina stepped back as they worked, watching with a mixture of hope and gratitude. It was a strange feeling, knowing that Rafiki, the once indomitable ruler of the savannah, was now in such a fragile condition. But there was a sense of relief as the team administered the tranquilizer. And Rafiki gradually drifted into a peaceful, sedated state. They carefully placed him on a stretcher and transported him back to the conservation center within Tsavo National Park. Amina stayed behind, standing in the quiet night, feeling a deep connection to the lion she had saved. In that moment, she realized that it wasn't just a duty to care for animals. It was something deeper, a bond of empathy and respect for life itself. She had offered Rafiki a second chance, not out of pity, but because she understood the value of every life, no matter how great or small. And in that understanding, she found her purpose, a reminder of why she had spent so many years devoted to preserving the creatures of the park. A week later, Amina returned to Tsavo National Park to visit Rafiki. She had been anxious to see how he was faring after the treatments. She arrived at the conservation center, a place that had become a sanctuary for many wounded animals over the years, and was immediately directed to the area where Rafiki was recovering. As she approached, a sense of calm washed over her. There, in a safe and protected area, Rafiki lay peacefully, resting under the care of the team. His wounds were slowly healing, and although he still bore the scars of the battle, there was a noticeable improvement in his condition. His once tattered mane had started to regain some of its former fullness, though it would never return to the majestic golden glory it had once held. His eyes, though still a little dim, now had a spark of life in him again. Rafiki raised his head as he noticed Amina approaching, his eyes following her with recognition. A slow, tired movement of his head was all he could manage. But to Amina, it was enough. There was a sense of gratitude in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of her efforts and care. The lion no longer seemed as frail, though he was far from his former strength. He was still vulnerable, but his will to survive was evident. Amina stepped closer to him, her heart warmed by the sight. "You're doing well, Rafiki," she murmured, sitting down beside him. The lion looked at her with quiet trust, his body resting, but his spirit clearly a little stronger. The conservation team had done an excellent job of providing him with the proper care. His wounds had been cleaned, stitched, and bandaged, and he was now in a safe environment, free from the dangers of the wild that had once been his domain. But more than that, Rafiki was surrounded by the peace and quiet of the park, a place where he could rest and heal without fear of being challenged by younger lions or having to fight for his survival. Although the pride he had once led had left him, Rafiki was no longer alone. The team had made sure that he had the company of other animals in the park, some of them fellow predators who, like him, had suffered in their own ways. But more importantly, Amina had continued to visit him every day. She brought him food, comforted him with her presence, and spoke to him softly, assuring him that his final days would be peaceful and free from the struggles of the past. As Amina sat beside Rafiki, she spoke quietly, her words filled with kindness. "The last days of your life will be peaceful here, Rafiki," she whispered, her voice full of affection. "You will be at rest, free from the battles you once fought." It was a simple promise, but one that carried weight. Amina knew that Rafiki had earned his peace. After all he had done for the land and its creatures. She hoped that, in the time he had left, he would find solace in knowing that he was not alone, that he was cared for, and that his legacy would live on in the stories of those who had known him. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's visits to Rafiki became a regular part of her routine. She made sure that he had the proper food, and she stayed with him for hours each time, offering her company and talking to him about the world outside, about the animals in the park, and about the people who had once respected him. In return, Rafiki's presence brought a quiet sense of comfort to Amina. The bond they shared grew stronger with each passing day. Though the mighty lion had once ruled the vast plains of Tsavo with unmatched strength and pride, his life now had a different rhythm. His recovery was slow, and he still had a long way to go before he was fully healed. But Amina could see the change in him. The fire in his eyes was no longer completely extinguished. The lion who had once been invincible was now an older, wiser creature, one who no longer had to fight for dominance, but could simply exist in the peace that he had earned. Amina often found herself reflecting on the lessons Rafiki had taught her. His strength had been legendary, but so too had been his vulnerability. His leadership had been defined by his fierce will to protect, but in his final days, it was the compassion and care of others that had offered him peace. She realized that every creature, no matter how strong or regal, would one day need help, and in those moments of weakness, the kindness of others could make all the difference. The days that Rafiki spent in the park, under Amina's care, were filled with quiet moments of healing. He no longer had to fight for survival, no longer had to protect a pride or territory. He could simply rest, knowing that he had earned the respect of all who knew him. Amina's promise had been fulfilled. Rafiki's last days were indeed peaceful, free from the battles and struggles that had once defined his life. And as Rafiki rested in the safety of Tsavo, Amina knew that his legacy would continue to inspire those who knew his story. The once great lion had found a final refuge, surrounded by the land he had once ruled, cared for by the woman who had offered him a second chance at life. In his recovery, there was not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with peace, comfort, and the love of those who cared for him.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.